The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of Concord's single dusty street, and Theresa Turner stepped down into a town that looked like it had forgotten how to welcome strangers. It was October of 1873, and the California settlement sprawled before her like a handful of wooden buildings thrown carelessly across the brown earth, baking under a sun that seemed to have personal grievances against anything that dared to grow. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling the weight of her teaching certificate tucked safely inside, along with every hope she had carried across 3 states to get here. The school board had written that they desperately needed a teacher, that the children of Concord were growing up wild as tumbleweeds without proper education. What they had failed to mention in their enthusiastic correspondence was that the town had precisely 0 interest in housing a single woman of 22 who arrived without family or husband in tow. Theresa walked directly to the boarding house, a 2-story structure that looked slightly less weathered than its neighbors. The woman who answered her knock took one look at her travel-worn dress and unaccompanied state before shaking her head so hard her gray bun threatened to come loose. "No rooms available," Mrs. Hutchins said, already closing the door. "But I can see the vacancy sign in your window," Theresa protested, wedging her boot against the doorframe with an audacity born of 3 days without proper sleep. "That sign's old. No rooms." The door shut with a finality that echoed down the empty street. Theresa stood there for a moment, dust settling on her navy skirt, before squaring her shoulders and marching to the next establishment. Then the next. By the time the sun had moved a hand's width across the sky, she had been turned away from every door in town. The reasons varied in their creativity, but not their message. Improper for a single woman, no chaperone, might give the place a bad reputation. Already rented, closing down, opening up, burned down last week, though the building stood perfectly intact before her eyes. She found herself back on the main street, trying to calculate how much money she had left and whether it would be enough for a ticket back east. The thought made her throat tight. She had promised herself she would make something of her life, had spent every penny on her education, had written hundreds of letters seeking a position. Concord had been her first acceptance. "You look like you could use some water." Theresa turned to find a man standing a respectful distance away, holding out a canteen. He was tall, built like someone who had spent his life working rather than sitting, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore the practical clothing of a rancher, his boots worn but well-maintained, his hat shading a face that managed to be both rugged and unexpectedly kind. "I am rather thirsty," she admitted, accepting the canteen. The water was warm but clean, and she had to force herself not to drink too greedily. "Thank you, Mr. Austin James," he said, tipping his hat. "And you would be the new teacher everyone's been talking about." "Talking about but apparently not willing to house," Theresa said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. She handed back the canteen. "I am Theresa Turner, though I am beginning to think I will not be teaching anyone after all." Austin's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. Martha Hutchins told you she had no rooms even though she has had 3 empty since summer. Then you tried the Parsons place, and they said something about their establishment being for families only. You seem remarkably well informed about my afternoon of rejection." "Small town," Austin said simply, "and I know how people think around here. They want their children educated, but they do not want to upset the delicate sensibilities of folks like Reverend Howell and his wife, who seem to believe a woman alone is either a scandal waiting to happen or a threat to every marriage in town." Theresa felt something crack inside her chest, the careful composure she had maintained all day finally splintering. I came here to teach children their letters and numbers, not to seduce anyone's husband. I have my certificate, my references, a contract with the school board. But apparently none of that matters because I lack a husband to make me respectable. The school board being represented by exactly one person, Mayor Kendrick, who has probably locked himself in his office to avoid having to face you, Austin said. His tone was matter of fact, but she could hear the thread of anger running through it. He is good at making promises and less good at seeing them through. Then I suppose I should start calculating stage-coach fares, Theresa said quietly. Austin was silent for a moment, and when she looked at him, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of how disheveled she must appear after days of travel. But there was nothing improper in his gaze, only a kind of careful assessment, as though he were working through a complex problem. "There is a room at my ranch for you," he said finally. Theresa blinked. "I beg your pardon, my ranch is about 3 miles out of town. I have a house with more rooms than I know what to do with, built by my father who apparently expected to have a dozen children instead of just me and my sister. My sister Clara lives there too, so you would have a proper chaperone. The room is yours if you want it, for whatever rent you can manage on a teacher's salary." She stared at him, trying to find the angle, the catch, the reason a stranger would offer such a thing. "Why would you do that?" Austin's expression softened slightly. "Because I have a 9-year-old niece who deserves a proper education. And because I am tired of watching this town eat itself alive with small-minded thinking. Because my father built that house as a place where people could make a fresh start, and it seems a shame to let all those rooms sit empty when someone needs one. Because it is the right thing to do." "You do not even know me," Theresa said, though hope was beginning to kindle in her chest despite her best efforts to smother it. "I know you came all the way to California to teach children you had never met. I know you tried every door in town and did not give up until you ran out of doors. I know you are standing here covered in dust, probably hungry and exhausted, and you are still standing straight." He smiled then, a quick flash that transformed his entire face. "That tells me enough." Theresa felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes and furiously blinked them back. She had not cried through any of the rejections, would not start now. "I would need to see this room, meet your sister. I would insist on paying proper rent, and there would need to be clear boundaries and understandings about the arrangement." "Naturally," Austin said, as though women made lists of demands at him every day. "My wagon is at the stable. I can take you out there now if you like, and if the arrangement does not suit you, I will bring you back to town and we will think of something else." "What else is there to think of?" "I am generally pretty good at solving problems when I put my mind to it," Austin said. "But let's see how you feel about the ranch first." The ride out to the James Ranch gave Theresa her first real look at the California landscape, beyond Concord's dusty streets. The land rolled in gentle hills covered with dry grass that whispered in the hot breeze, punctuated by dark green oaks that offered precious pools of shade. In the distance, mountains rose purple and hazy, and despite everything, Theresa felt something in her chest loosen at the sheer space of it all. Austin drove the wagon with easy competence, pointing out landmarks as they went. The creek that ran year-round, vital for the cattle. The old mission ruins on the far hill, slowly returning to the earth. The place where his father had first staked his claim 20 years ago, when this had all been Mexican territory and California had been a different kind of wild. "You grew up here?" Theresa asked, grateful for conversation that kept her from dwelling on the precariousness of her situation. "Born in that house I am taking you to," Austin said. "My father came west in '48 during the gold rush. He was smart enough to realize that selling beef to miners was more reliable than hoping to strike gold himself. Built up a good herd, bought the land proper when he could, married my mother in '53. She died when I was 12. Fever. I am sorry, Theresa said quietly. Austin nodded acknowledgement. My sister Clara is 10 years younger than me. She was just a baby when we lost our mother, does not remember her much. Our father raised us best he could, taught us both to ride and rope and manage the ranch. He always said capable people were capable people, regardless of whether they wore trousers or skirts. He sounds like he was a good man. The best I have known, Austin said. He died 2 years ago. Threw from a horse, of all things, after 30 years of handling the most temperamental animals without issue. Sometimes life does not make much sense. Theresa thought about her own father, a shopkeeper in Pennsylvania who had been deeply disappointed when she had insisted on using her small inheritance from her grandmother for teaching college rather than a dowry. They had not parted on good terms. No, she agreed. It does not. The ranch house came into view as they crested a low hill, and Theresa caught her breath. It was larger than she had expected, a sprawling structure of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around at least 2 sides. Corrals and outbuildings spread around it in organized clusters, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance, brown and white shapes against the golden grass. It is beautiful, she said, surprised by how much she meant it. Austin looked pleased. It has its charms. Winters can be cold, and the well runs low in dry years, and half the shutters need replacing. But it is home. A woman emerged from the house as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. She was younger than Theresa had expected, perhaps 17 or 18, with the same dark hair as Austin, and a face that was pretty despite the suspicion currently narrowing her eyes. Austin James. What have you done now? She called out. Solved a problem, Austin said, hopping down from the wagon and offering Theresa his hand to help her descend. Clara, this is Miss Theresa Turner, the new teacher. Miss Turner, my sister Clara. Clara's expression shifted from suspicion to understanding to something that might have been delight. You are the teacher. The one no one will rent to. She shot a glare in the direction of town, though it was well out of sight. Bunch of hypocritical fools. They want their children educated, but God forbid they show some Christian charity to the woman who traveled all this way to do it. Austin has kindly offered me a room here, Theresa said carefully. If that is acceptable to you as well, I would of course pay rent and would not want to impose on your household. Clara laughed, a bright sound that startled a pair of chickens scratching in the yard. Impose. Miss Turner, we have 6 bedrooms and 2 people. You would be doing us a favor. This house gets awfully quiet, and I have been teaching my daughter her letters myself, but I know I am not doing a proper job of it. Having a real teacher around would be wonderful. You have a daughter? Theresa asked, then immediately worried she had been too forward, but Clara just nodded, gesturing toward the house. Emma. She is 9 and smart as a whip and deserves better than my stumbling attempts at education. Come inside, please. You look dead on your feet and I just made lemonade. The inside of the house was clean and comfortable, furnished with solid, practical pieces that spoke of craftsmanship rather than wealth. The main room had a large fireplace, windows that let in light, and a table that could easily seat 10. Clara led her through to a kitchen that was clearly the heart of the home, where a girl sat at the table laboriously copying letters onto a slate. Emma looked up when they entered, her eyes widening. She had her mother's dark hair but lighter eyes, somewhere between gray and blue, and there was a pencil smudge on her nose. Emma, this is Miss Turner, Clara said. She is going to be the new teacher in town, and she is going to stay with us for a while. A real teacher. Emma said, setting down her chalk. Like in the books. I hope to be a good teacher at least, Theresa said, smiling. What are you working on? Copying the alphabet, Emma said, showing her slate. But my MTKs always come out looking like WTKs, and I cannot remember if Q comes before P or after. After, Theresa said gently. And MTKs are tricky for everyone at first. The key is to think of them as three little hills in a row. May I? At Emma's nod, she took the chalk and demonstrated, her hand automatically falling into the patient movements she had practiced in her training. C. Down, up, down, up, down. Emma watched with such intense concentration that Theresa felt something warm bloom in her chest. This was why she had come west, why she had fought so hard for her education and her certificate. For children like this one, hungry to learn. Clara poured lemonade while Austin brought in Theresa's carpetbag from the wagon. Let me show you the room, Clara said. It is upstairs, faces east, so you get good morning light. It was supposed to be for the baby that came after me, but... She shrugged. Life had other plans. The room was perfect. Small but not cramped, with a real bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that looked out over the ranch toward the mountains. Someone had put fresh linens on the bed, and there was a rag rug on the floor that looked handmade. This is too much, Theresa said, her voice thick. You do not even know me. Austin knows people, Clara said simply. He has always had a knack for it. If he says you are all right, you are all right. Besides, any woman brave enough to come all the way out here to teach deserves better than what this town tried to give you today. She paused. I was married at 16 to a man who seemed kind enough in town, but had a temper once he got me alone. He broke my arm twice before his horse finally threw him hard enough to break his neck. People whispered about me something fierce afterward, like maybe I had somehow caused it, like I was cursed or dangerous. Austin never believed a word of it. He took me and Emma in without a second thought. So I know what it is like when people decide who you are without ever bothering to know you. Theresa met her eyes and saw understanding there, the kind that came from experience rather than sympathy. Thank you, she said. Truly. The rent is $5 a month, and you are welcome to take meals with us, Clara said. I am a decent cook, though Austin might tell you otherwise when I burn the biscuits, which happens more often than I would like to admit. Her biscuits are fine, Austin said from the doorway, making both women jump slightly. I brought up the wash basin. There is a pump in the yard for water, and we usually heat bath water on Saturdays if you want a proper bath. Outhouse is behind the barn, and yes, before you ask, I check it for spiders regularly. Theresa found herself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. You have thought of everything. I try, Austin said. Dinner is usually around 6. Do you need anything else? Or would you like some time to settle in? What Theresa wanted was to collapse on that beautifully made bed and sleep for about 12 hours. But she was acutely aware that she had a position to maintain, a school to open, a purpose for being here that went beyond securing a place to sleep. I should go back to town tomorrow and speak with Mayor Kendrick about starting classes. I need to see the schoolhouse, assess what supplies we have, determine which children will be attending. I can take you in the morning, Austin offered. Fair warning, though, Kendrick is going to act like everything is perfectly normal and he did not leave you stranded. Then I will politely remind him of his obligations, Theresa said, lifting her chin. Austin's smile was slow and approving. Something tells me you will manage that just fine. That night, Theresa lay in the unfamiliar bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. Cattle lowing in the distance, the wind moving through the eaves, the creak of the house adjusting to the cooling air. It was nothing like the city sound she had grown up with, but it was not unpleasant. Through the thin walls, She could hear the low murmur of Austin and Clara talking in the kitchen below, their voices too soft to make out words but carrying a warmth that spoke of deep affection and trust. She thought about the strangeness of the day, how it had gone from disaster to this unexpected refuge. Austin James was a puzzle she could not quite solve. He was clearly educated, his speech careful and his vocabulary broader than she might have expected from a rancher. He was kind but not soft, offering help without any apparent expectation of return. And there had been that moment in the wagon when he had pointed out a hawk circling overhead, his face open with simple pleasure in the sight, and she had felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. She was here to teach, she reminded herself firmly. Whatever Austin's kindness meant, she could not afford to read more into it than simple decency. She had a job to do, a life to build, and she had learned long ago that depending too much on anyone else's goodwill was a recipe for disappointment. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not help but think that for someone who claimed to be solving a problem, Austin James had looked at her like she might be something more than an obligation. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the east-facing window, exactly as Clara had promised. Theresa washed her face in the basin, changed into her other dress which was only marginally less travel-worn than yesterday's, and braided her hair into the severe style she had adopted during her teaching training. Armor, one of her instructors had called it. The way a woman presented herself could either invite respect or dismiss it, and Theresa had learned to err on the side of severity. Downstairs, she found the kitchen already bustling. Clara was at the stove, Emma was setting the table, and Austin was coming in from outside with a bucket of fresh milk. The scene was so domestic, so settled, that Theresa felt like an intruder. "Good morning," Clara called out cheerfully. "I hope you like eggs. We have chickens that produce more than we can eat, and I keep trying new ways to cook them. This morning it is scrambled with cheese and herbs." "That sounds wonderful," Theresa said honestly. She had eaten cold bread for breakfast more days than not over the past year, saving money for her journey. Austin set down the milk bucket and pulled out a chair for her in a gesture so natural he seemed unaware of doing it. Ready to face Mayor Kendrick and his excuses. "As ready as I will ever be," Theresa said, "though I confess I am not sure what I will do if he simply refuses to honor the contract." "He will honor it," Austin said with certainty. "The man is a coward and a fool, but he knows the town needs a school. His own son is 10 years old and can barely write his own name, and if he gives you trouble, I will have words with him." "I can fight my own battles," Theresa said, more sharply than she intended. Austin held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I do not doubt it. But there is a difference between fighting alone and having someone at your back. You have been here one day. I have known these people my whole life. Let me help." Theresa wanted to refuse out of principle, but practicality won out. "All right," she said, "but I do the talking." "Understood." They ate breakfast together, Emma asking Theresa endless questions about where she had come from, what she had studied, whether she had ever seen the ocean. Theresa found herself relaxing under the barrage of curiosity, answering questions with increasing warmth. The girl was bright and eager, exactly the kind of student she had dreamed of teaching. The ride into town was quieter than yesterday's journey. Austin seemed content to let the silence stretch, his attention on the horses and the road. Theresa found herself studying him in sidelong glances, trying to understand what kind of man offered a stranger room and board without apparent ulterior motive. He had strong hands, she noticed, scarred from work, but with long fingers that suggested dexterity. When he caught her looking, she quickly turned her gaze back to the landscape. "Can I ask you something?" Austin said finally. Of course. What made you want to be a teacher? Theresa considered the question. My grandmother taught me to read when I was 4 years old, and it was like someone had given me a key to every door in the world. I could go anywhere, be anyone, learn anything, all from the pages of a book. When she died, she left me a small inheritance with instructions that I was to use it for my own education. My father wanted me to save it for a dowry, to make myself more marriageable. She smiled without humor. We disagreed rather strongly on that point. So you used it for teaching college, Austin said. 2 years at a women's academy in Philadelphia. Best 2 years of my life, despite eating nothing but oatmeal and darning my stockings until they were more darn than stocking. And then I wrote to every school district I could find that was advertising for teachers. Concord was the first to write back with an actual offer. Lucky for us, Austin said quietly. Theresa felt heat rise in her cheeks and was grateful for the bonnet that hid her face. Lucky if Mayor Kendrick does not decide to break the contract. But when they arrived at the mayor's office, they found him in full retreat mode. Kendrick was a portly man with thinning hair and the kind of mustache that suggested he thought it made him look distinguished. He jumped when Austin and Theresa entered, knocking over an inkwell in his haste to stand. "Miss Turner," he said, dabbing at the spreading ink stain with a handkerchief. "I was just about to send word to you. Welcome to Concord." "Thank you, Mayor Kendrick," Theresa said, her voice cool and professional. "I arrived yesterday as arranged. I attempted to secure lodging at several establishments in town, but it seems there may have been some miscommunication about my arrival." Kendrick had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Yes. Well, some of our citizens can be rather particular about, that is to say, the situation of a single woman without proper supervision. Miss Turner is residing at my ranch with my sister as chaperone," Austin said, his tone carrying a warning Theresa could not quite interpret. "So I trust there will be no further concerns about propriety." The mayor's relief was visible. "Oh, well then, that is perfectly acceptable. The James family is of course highly respected. I am sure no one will object to that arrangement." "How convenient," Theresa said dryly. "Now, shall we discuss the school? I would like to see the building and review what supplies are available. I also need a list of students who will be expected to attend, along with their ages and any previous education they may have received." Kendrick scrambled to gather papers, clearly eager to move past his failure to ensure she had lodging. The schoolhouse, it turned out, was at the far end of town, a simple wooden structure that had been used primarily for church services and town meetings. The interior was sparse but serviceable. Rough benches, a pot-bellied stove, windows that actually had glass, and a small desk at the front. "We have some slates and chalk," Kendrick said, opening a cupboard to reveal a meager supply. "And there are a few primers, though I admit they are somewhat outdated. The previous teacher, well, he left rather suddenly last year." "Why?" Theresa asked, running her hand over the desk and feeling the initials carved into its surface. "He received a better offer from a school in Sacramento," Kendrick said quickly. Too quickly. Austin made a sound that might have been a cough or a laugh. "He got drunk and tried to rob the general store, and the town ran him out before the marshal could arrest him." Kendrick's face flushed. "That was never proven. Bill Harrison caught him with a bottle in one hand and the cash box in the other," Austin said, "but sure, never proven." Theresa looked between the two men and sighed. "Wonderful. So the last educator was a criminal drunk, and the town has been without a school for over a year. No wonder the children are behind." "Which is precisely why we need you," Kendrick said, rallying slightly. "You come highly recommended, Miss Turner. Your credentials are impressive." I am certain you will do an excellent job. I will do my best, Theresa said, but I will need supplies. Real books, not just primers. Geography texts, history, mathematics. Writing paper, proper pens and ink. And I will need parents to understand that education requires consistency. Students must attend regularly and be prepared to work. Of course, Kendrick said. I will speak with the town council about funds for supplies. When? Theresa pressed. Well, we meet next month. Not good enough, Austin interjected. School should start as soon as possible. Those children have lost enough time. I will put up half the money for supplies if the town matches it. We can have an order sent to Sacramento within the week. Kendrick looked like he wanted to argue but could not find solid ground. That is very generous of you, Mr. James. It is an investment in this community, Austin said. Something more people should consider. They spent another hour going over details. The list of potential students, which ranged from a 6-year-old girl to a boy of 14 who had never learned to read. The school schedule, which Theresa insisted must be 5 full days a week regardless of harvest schedules. And the matter of her salary, which Kendrick seemed reluctant to discuss, until Austin made it clear he was not leaving until the issue was settled. By the time they left the mayor's office, Theresa had a contract, a promise of funds, and a start date 2 weeks away. It was more than she had hoped for when she had arrived yesterday, dusty and desperate. Thank you, she said to Austin as they walked back to the wagon. You did not have to offer to pay for supplies. Yes, I did, Austin said simply. This town has been content to let things slide for too long. Someone needs to push back. And that someone is you, when necessary. He helped her into the wagon, his hand steady and warm on her elbow. Besides, Emma deserves a real school, and I suspect there are more children like her who are being failed by the town's lack of commitment. On the ride back to the ranch, Theresa found herself thinking about responsibility and what it meant to be part of a community. In Philadelphia, she had lived in a boarding house full of other young women, all of them focused on their studies and their futures. There had been camaraderie but not real connection, temporary friendships formed from proximity rather than choice. Here, in this strange, dusty town, she was being drawn into something more complex, something that involved obligations and expectations she had not anticipated. And at the center of it was Austin James, who seemed to carry the weight of the entire community on his shoulders without complaint. "Can I ask you something now?" she said. "Seems only fair. Why did you never marry?" The question was out before she could stop it, far too personal for their brief acquaintance. Austin was quiet for a long moment, and Theresa was about to apologize when he spoke. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Her name was Margaret, daughter of a rancher over in Clayton. Pretty girl, good family. We seemed to suit each other well enough. What happened? She met someone else. A banker from San Francisco who could offer her a life in the city, parties, fine dresses, everything I could not give her here. She broke it off 3 weeks before the wedding." His tone was matter of fact, but Theresa could hear the old hurt underneath. "I was angry for a while, but honestly, she made the right choice. She wanted a different kind of life, and I would have made her miserable trying to keep her happy here. Last I heard, she had 3 children and a house on Nob Hill. I hope she is happy. And you never tried again." Austin shrugged. "The ranch keeps me busy. Clara and Emma need me, and I suppose I have become particular about the kind of woman I could build a life with. She would need to be someone who sees the value in this place, in this work. Someone strong enough to face the isolation and the hard seasons. Someone who does not need the world to be easy in order to find it worth living in." Theresa thought about that, about the women she had known who dreamed only of security and status, and the smaller number who dreamed of purpose. That is a high standard. Maybe, Austin said. But settling for less seems like a recipe for two people making each other unhappy. They rode in silence after that, but it was a different kind of silence, weighted with things neither of them was quite ready to say. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Theresa threw herself into getting ready for school, creating lesson plans for multiple age groups, organizing the meager supplies, and preparing the schoolhouse. Austin was true to his word, and the supplies arrived from Sacramento faster than anyone expected. New primers, slate boards, chalk, ink, and pens, and even a few proper textbooks on mathematics and geography. In the evenings, she took her meals with the James family and found herself drawn deeper into their rhythms. Clara was teaching her to make biscuits that did not turn out like rocks, and Emma had taken to following her around, asking questions about everything from cloud formations to why the alphabet had the letters in that particular order. And Austin was simply there, a steady presence that she found herself looking for whenever she entered a room. He showed her around the ranch, explaining his father's philosophy of land management and how they rotated grazing to keep the grass healthy. He introduced her to the ranch hands, a rotating crew of men who worked seasonal jobs and moved on. He taught her to ride a gentle mare named Clover so she could travel to town independently, patiently correcting her posture and hand position until she felt confident enough to venture out alone. And sometimes, in the evenings after Emma had gone to bed and Clara was working on her mending, Theresa and Austin would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. They talked about everything and nothing: his plans to expand the herd, her ideas for advanced students, books they had both read, places they hoped to see someday. He told her about growing up without a mother, learning to be both brother and parent to Clara. She told him about her grandmother's library, tiny but treasured, and how reading had saved her from the crushing disappointment of her father's expectations. "You miss Pennsylvania?" Austin asked one evening, about a week before school was set to begin. Theresa considered the question honestly. "I miss my grandmother, though she has been gone 5 years now. I miss the libraries and the bookshops, but I do not miss feeling like my whole life was already decided, like I was supposed to fold myself into someone else's idea of who I should be." She paused. "Is that terrible, to not miss home?" "Not if it was never really home in the first place," Austin said. "Home is not just where you are from, it is where you feel like you can be yourself." "Is that how you feel about the ranch, most days?" Austin said. "There are times it feels like too much, like I am trying to hold together something that wants to fall apart. But then I will see Clara laughing, or Emma learning something new, or watch the sun come up over the east pasture, and I remember why it matters." Theresa felt something in her chest tighten and release, a sensation she could not quite name. "You are a good man, Austin James." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very dark. "I am trying to be." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged, and Theresa felt her breath catch. Then Clara called from inside that the coffee was ready, and the spell broke. But as Theresa rose to go inside, she felt Austin's hand brush against hers, just for a moment, and the warmth of that brief contact stayed with her long after she had gone to bed. The first day of school arrived with October giving way to November and a snap of cold in the morning air. Theresa dressed in her best dark blue dress, braided her hair tightly, and tried to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach. She had trained for this, had dreamed of it, but the reality of standing in front of actual children who needed her to know what she was doing felt suddenly overwhelming. Austin drove her into town in the wagon, with Emma bouncing excitedly in the back. "You are going to be wonderful," he said quietly as they pulled up to the schoolhouse. "How can you know that?" Theresa asked. "Because I have watched you prepare. Because I have seen how you talk to Emma, patient and encouraging but never condescending. Because you care whether they learn, and that matters more than anything else." Theresa wanted to tell him that his faith in her meant more than he could possibly know, but there was no time. Parents were arriving with their children, dropping them off with varying degrees of reluctance and suspicion. Theresa stood at the door and greeted each student by name, having memorized the list Kendrick had provided. There were 15 students in total, ages 6 to 14, with wildly varying levels of preparation. Some could read simple words, others did not know their letters. Theresa had planned for this, had created a system of groups that would allow her to work with students at different levels while keeping everyone engaged. The first hour was chaotic as she established rules and routines, but by mid-morning, something miraculous happened. The children settled into learning. The youngest ones practiced forming letters on their slates, their tongues poking out in concentration. The middle group worked through a primer together, taking turns reading aloud. The oldest students, including the 14-year-old boy named Thomas, who had been convinced he was too old for school, bent over a geography text with growing interest as Theresa explained about different countries and continents. By the time she dismissed them at 3 in the afternoon, Theresa was exhausted but exhilarated. It had worked. They had actually learned things. Thomas had asked if he could borrow the geography book overnight, and 2 of the younger girls had shown her drawings they had made during the lunch break. It was more than she had hoped for on a first day. Austin was waiting outside with the wagon, and the smile that spread across his face when he saw her told her that her own joy must be written plainly on her features. "Good day?" he asked as she climbed up beside him. "The best," Theresa said. "Austin, they learned. Not just memorization, but real understanding, and they want to come back tomorrow." "Of course they do," he said, setting the horses in motion. "You made it worth coming back to." Emma chattered all the way home about what she had learned about the other children, about how Miss Turner had praised her penmanship. Clara had dinner waiting, and over pot roast and potatoes, Theresa found herself recounting the day in detail, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "This calls for a celebration," Clara declared. "I have been saving a pie for a special occasion." "You made pie and did not tell me," Austin said in mock outrage. "Apple, and you are lucky I am willing to share it with someone who ate half the apples before I could get them into the crust," Clara shot back, but she was smiling. That night, full of pie and good conversation, Theresa sat on her bed and wrote a letter to her grandmother's old friend in Philadelphia, the only person from her old life who had supported her teaching ambitions. She described Concord, the ranch, the school, the surprising warmth of the James family. And then, carefully, she wrote about Austin, about his kindness and his steady presence, about the way he seemed to understand her ambitions without needing them explained. She did not send that part. Instead, she crossed it out and wrote something safer about the California weather. But lying in the dark afterward, she thought about that moment on the porch, about his hand brushing hers, and wondered if she was reading something into his kindness that was not there, or if maybe, possibly, he felt it too. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that Theresa found herself settling into with surprising ease. 5 days a week, Austin drove her to town for school, and 5 days a week he was there waiting when she finished. The students were progressing faster than she had dared hope. Even Thomas, who had started reading adventure novels with an appetite that required Theresa to write to Sacramento for more books. On Saturdays, The whole household devoted itself to the work of the ranch. Theresa had not expected to participate, but Clara handed her an apron on her first Saturday and put her to work in the vegetable garden, harvesting the last of the season's produce before the frost could claim it. Austin was everywhere, mending fences, checking on cattle, meeting with the few ranch hands he employed, managing the endless tasks that kept the operation running. Sundays they went to church, and Theresa had to admit she enjoyed watching the townspeople's reactions to her presence. Reverend Howell, who had been one of the loudest voices against a single-woman teacher, could hardly object to her now that she was attending services regularly and living under the respectable roof of the James family. His wife tried to maintain a cool distance, but even she eventually cracked and admitted that her youngest son had learned more in a month with Theresa than in the previous year of sporadic home instruction. November slipped into December, and the weather turned genuinely cold. Austin showed Theresa how to bank the stove in the schoolhouse to keep it warm overnight, and Clara taught her to make the thick stews that would carry them through winter. Emma was working through books at a level that delighted Theresa, and several of the other students were showing similar progress. And through it all, Theresa found herself increasingly aware of Austin. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the low rumble of his laugh, the competence of his hands as he worked, the gentle patience he showed with Emma when she was struggling with a concept, the fierce protectiveness he demonstrated toward Clara whenever anyone in town made a sideways comment about her past. She told herself it was simple admiration, gratitude for his kindness. But she knew she was lying. It all came to a head on a cold Saturday in mid-December. Theresa had volunteered to help Austin repair a section of fence in the north pasture, mostly because she was going stir-crazy in the house and needed the physical work. They worked in companionable silence for an hour, replacing broken rails and securing posts, until Austin paused to wipe his forehead despite the chill. "You are good at this," he observed, nodding at the rail she had just nailed into place. "My grandmother believed in practical education," Theresa said. "She taught me basic carpentry along with Latin and mathematics. She said a woman should never be helpless just because a man was not around to help." "Smart woman," Austin said. He was quiet for a moment then. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I first saw you in town that day, looking like you were ready to fight the whole world despite being exhausted and disappointed, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen." He was not looking at her, his attention apparently focused on the fence, but his voice was steady. "And then I got to know you, and I realized brave was only part of it. You are also brilliant and kind and funny, and so dedicated to those children that you glow when you talk about them. And I find myself looking forward to driving you to school every morning just because it means I get to spend that time with you. And I am fairly certain I am falling in love with you, and I needed to tell you that before I lost my courage entirely." Theresa's hands had frozen on the fence rail. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Austin, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly, finally meeting her eyes. "I know you came here for teaching, not to be courted by some rancher, and I do not want to make things awkward when you are living under my roof. But I also could not keep pretending I do not feel what I feel, so there it is. And if you want me to take you back to the house and never mention it again, I will do that." Theresa took a breath, then another. "Can I tell you something, please? I have spent my entire adult life being told what I should want: a husband, children, a quiet life keeping house. And I fought against it because none of it felt like mine, like I would be living a life designed for someone else." She set down her hammer and turned to face him fully. "But this, here, With you it does not feel like someone else's design. It feels like maybe I could have both things. The teaching I love and a life with someone who understands why I love it. Someone who does not need me to be smaller or quieter or less ambitious to fit into his world. You could never be smaller, Austin said softly. You are the biggest presence I have ever known. Theresa felt tears prickling at her eyes and was surprised to find they were happy tears. I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been for weeks, but I was too scared to admit it. Too scared of losing everything I have worked for, too scared of being hurt, too scared of trusting that something this good could be real. Austin stepped closer, and suddenly the cold wind and the gray sky and the half-finished fence all faded away. I am terrified too, he admitted. The last time I let myself love someone, she left. And you are extraordinary, Theresa. You could go anywhere, do anything. Why would you choose to stay here with me? Because here is where I feel most like myself, Theresa said, echoing his words from weeks ago. Because you see me, all of me, and you do not ask me to be different. Because when I think about my future now, you are in it. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. His palms were rough from work and cold from the weather, and Theresa leaned into the touch like it was the most natural thing in the world. May I kiss you? Austin asked, his voice rough. Yes, Theresa breathed. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as though they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Theresa's hands came up to grip his coat, pulling him closer, and Austin made a soft sound against her mouth that sent heat racing through her despite the December cold. The kiss deepened, turned hungry, both of them pouring weeks of unspoken feeling into the contact. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I want to do this right, he said. Court you properly, give you time to be sure, not rush you into anything. I appreciate that, Theresa said, though part of her wanted to argue that she was already sure, that she had never been more certain of anything in her life. But Austin, we are living in the same house. People are going to talk. Let them, Austin said fiercely. Clara will serve as chaperone just like she has been, and we will be so proper that even Reverend Howell will not be able to find fault. And when we are sure, when we have given this the time it deserves, then we will get married. If you will have me. That sounds dangerously close to a proposal, Theresa said, but she was smiling. Consider it a statement of intent, Austin said, stealing another quick kiss. I intend to marry you, Theresa Turner. I intend to build a life with you that honors both who you are and who I am. I intend to support your teaching and share my ranch with you and grow old watching you shape the minds of generations of children. But first, I intend to court you properly and give you every chance to change your mind. I am not going to change my mind, Theresa said. Good, Austin said. But I am courting you anyway. And he did. For the next 3 months, Austin courted Theresa with a dedication that was both charming and slightly overwhelming. He brought her wildflowers he rode miles to find. He gave her books ordered specially from San Francisco. He took her on rides to beautiful spots around the ranch, always with Emma or Clara along as chaperone. He learned which kind of tea she preferred and made sure it was always available. He listened to her talk about her students with genuine interest and offered thoughtful insights. He read her favorite books so they could discuss them together. And through it all, he was unfailingly patient about physical affection, stealing kisses only when they had a moment of privacy, and never pushing for more despite the heat that built between them with every touch. The town, predictably, had opinions about the courtship. Some people were delighted, seeing it as a romantic story of the teacher and the rancher. Others thought Theresa was a schemer who had set her sights on one of the most eligible men in the county. Still others worried that if they married, Theresa would leave her position, and the school would be without a teacher again. Theresa addressed that last concern directly during a school board meeting in February. "If and when I marry, I will continue teaching," she said firmly. "There is no reason a married woman cannot be an educator. My personal life does not diminish my abilities or my commitment to these children." Mayor Kendrick looked uncomfortable. "Now, Miss Turner, traditionally, women were not allowed to own property or vote either," Theresa interrupted. "But this is 1874 and traditions change. I am asking you to judge me on my performance, not on my marital status." There was grumbling, but ultimately the board agreed, mostly because the parents had made it clear they would riot if Theresa was forced to leave. The children's progress was undeniable, and several families had moved to Concord specifically because word had spread about the quality of the school. Spring came to California in a rush of green and wildflowers, and on a warm April evening, Austin took Theresa riding to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. They had Emma with them, as always, but when they stopped to admire the view, the girl conveniently became very interested in picking flowers at the far end of the meadow. "She is not subtle," Theresa observed, watching Emma's obvious attempt to give them privacy. "She gets it from her mother," Austin said. "Clara has been dropping hints for weeks that I should make this official." "Make what official?" Theresa asked, though her heart was suddenly pounding. Austin dismounted and helped her down from her horse, then took both her hands in his. "Theresa Turner, I have been courting you for 4 months now. In that time, you have become the center of my world. I love your passion for teaching, your fierce determination, the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, how you have made my house feel like a true home. I love the way you are with Emma, patient and challenging in equal measure. I love waking up knowing I will see you at breakfast and going to bed thinking about conversations we had that day. And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, if you will let me." He released one of her hands to pull a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, the deep blue of the evening sky. "It was my mother's," Austin said. "My father gave it to her when they were married, and she wore it every day until she died. I would be honored if you would wear it now. Theresa, will you marry me?" Theresa looked at the ring, at Austin's hopeful face, at Emma trying to pretend she was not watching from behind a convenient tree. She thought about everything she had dreamed of when she was a girl trapped in Pennsylvania, every vision of freedom and purpose she had carried west, and she realized that not once in those dreams had she imagined being this happy. "Yes," she said, and the word came out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, Austin, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting all these years for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and thorough, pouring all his love and relief and joy into the contact. Emma's delighted squeal echoed across the meadow and they broke apart laughing. "Can I tell Mama?" Emma called, running over. "You can tell everyone," Austin said, ruffling her hair. "We are getting married." They set the wedding for June after the school year ended. Theresa wanted to finish out the term, and Austin was deep in spring calving and could not easily take time away. Clara threw herself into wedding preparations with an enthusiasm that was both touching and occasionally overwhelming, determined to give her brother a celebration worthy of the occasion. The ceremony was held at the ranch on a perfect June day, with the entire town in attendance. Even the people who had refused to rent to Theresa 8 months ago came bearing gifts and good wishes, conveniently forgetting their earlier objections. Reverend Howell officiated, and if his sermon went on a bit long about the duties of wives, Theresa chose to ignore it in favor of focusing on Austin, who looked at her like she hung the moon. She wore a simple white dress that Clara had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Austin wore his best suit, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. When it came time to say their vows, his voice was steady and sure. "I promise to love you, honor you, and support your dreams," he said. "To be your partner in all things, to celebrate your triumphs and stand with you through hardships. To build a life with you that has room for both of us to grow." Theresa's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you with all that I am, to trust in us even when I am afraid, to build a home with you that is filled with laughter and purpose and love. To be your partner, your equal, your friend and lover for all our days." When they kissed as husband and wife, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Emma was crying happy tears and Clara was beaming with pride. And Theresa felt, for the first time in her life, like she had found exactly where she belonged. The celebration lasted late into the evening, with food and dancing and toasts. Several people made speeches about how unlikely the match had seemed at first and how right it turned out to be. The children from Theresa's school presented her with a hand-drawn card signed by all of them, thanking her for being their teacher and wishing her happiness. Finally, as the sun set and the guests began to depart, Austin and Theresa slipped away to the house. Clara and Emma were staying in town with friends for the night, giving them privacy. Standing in the quiet of their bedroom, Theresa felt a flutter of nervousness that must have shown on her face. "We do not have to rush anything," Austin said gently, taking her hands. "This is about us, about being together. Everything else happens at whatever pace feels right." Theresa took a breath and let herself feel the truth of his words, the security of knowing she was with someone who put her comfort and happiness first. "I love you," she said simply, "and I want this. I want all of it, with you." What followed was tender and sometimes awkward, two people learning each other with patience and care. Austin was gentle, attentive, making sure she was comfortable and willing at every step. And when they finally came together completely, Theresa felt a sense of rightness that went beyond the physical, a soul-deep recognition that this was what love was supposed to feel like. Afterward, lying in Austin's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow back to normal, Theresa thought about the girl she had been when she arrived in Concord, desperate and determined, and so afraid of failing. That girl had been brave, but she had also been alone, convinced that love and ambition could not coexist. How wrong she had been. "What are you thinking about?" Austin murmured, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "How grateful I am that no one would rent to the new teacher," Theresa said. "And how grateful I am that a cowboy said there was a room at his ranch for me." Austin's laugh rumbled through his chest. "I am grateful, too, for all of it. For your courage in coming here, for the town's short-sightedness in refusing you, for getting to be the one who offered help, for every moment that led us here." They talked late into the night, making plans for their future, dreaming about the life they would build together. Austin wanted to expand the ranch, maybe buy the adjoining property if it ever came up for sale. Theresa wanted to develop a lending library at the school, make books available to the whole community. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a year or two, to have time just for themselves first. Eventually they slept, tangled together in the summer warmth, and woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and the knowledge that this was the first morning of forever. The year that followed was full and rich. Theresa continued teaching, and the school's reputation grew to the point where families were moving to Concord specifically for the education their children could receive. She started a summer reading program and convinced Austin to donate one of the ranch's unused buildings for a proper library. The town council eventually agreed to fund it, and by the following spring, Concord had a small but respectable collection of books available to all residents. Austin expanded the ranch as planned, buying 50 additional acres and increasing the herd. He hired more permanent help, which allowed him more time to spend with Theresa. They fell into a comfortable partnership, sharing the work of running both the ranch and the household. On weekends, they would often ride out together to check on the cattle, and Theresa found herself learning to love the land the way Austin did, seeing its beauty and possibility. Clara met a quiet farmer named David who treated her with gentleness and respect, and they married in the spring of 1875. Emma was devastated at first about moving to her new stepfather's farm 3 miles away, but David made it clear that she was welcome to visit the ranch as often as she liked. And when Clara announced she was expecting a baby in the fall, Emma's excitement at becoming a big sister eased the transition. In August of 1875, Theresa realized she had missed her monthly courses and felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. When she told Austin, he picked her up and spun her around, whooping with joy despite her laughing protests. They decided to wait a few months before announcing it widely, wanting to keep the news just between them for a little while. Theresa continued teaching through the fall, though she let the school board know she would need to take a leave in the spring. To her surprise, the board was supportive, agreeing to hire a temporary replacement and hold her position when she was ready to return. The town had come a long way from the place that would not rent her a room. Their son was born in April of 1876, during a week of spring storms that turned the roads to mud and kept everyone confined to the house. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Theresa was convinced she could not do it, could not endure another contraction. But Austin never left her side, holding her hand, encouraging her, believing in her even when she could not believe in herself. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and red-faced and absolutely perfect, Austin cried openly. They named him Daniel, after Austin's father, and he had his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. Watching Austin hold their son for the first time, marveling at his tiny fingers and the impossibility of his existence, Theresa felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her family. This loud, messy, beautiful life was hers. She took 6 months away from teaching, time she spent learning to be a mother, marveling at every small development and slowly recovering her strength. Clara came often with her own baby daughter, and the cousins would lie on blankets together while the women talked. Emma, now 12, was a devoted helper, always ready to hold Daniel or sing to him when he was fussy. When Theresa returned to teaching that fall, she brought Daniel with her. Austin had built a small cradle that fit in the corner of the schoolhouse, and the students took turns watching over the baby when he was awake. It was unconventional, but it worked, and Theresa was grateful to have found a way to continue both parts of her life that mattered so much. The years flowed past, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Daniel grew into a bright, curious boy who loved books as much as his mother and horses as much as his father. In 1878, Theresa gave birth to twin daughters, Alice and Rose, who kept the entire household in chaos with their energy and mischief. Austin handled the chaos with patience and humor, and Theresa often found him in the evenings with a twin on each knee, reading them stories or teaching them songs. The ranch prospered, and the school became one of the finest in the county. Theresa wrote articles for educational journals about teaching methods, and was occasionally invited to speak at conferences in Sacramento. Austin was elected to the town council and used his position to push for improvements. Better roads, a proper doctor, a bank that did not charge extortionate interest rates. In 1880, they bought the adjoining property that Austin had always wanted, nearly doubling the size of the ranch. They built a new barn and expanded the house, adding rooms for the children and a study where Theresa could work on her lesson plans and correspondence. Emma graduated from Theresa's school that year, the first student to complete the full curriculum Theresa had developed. At the graduation ceremony, Emma gave a speech about the importance of education and credited Theresa with changing her life. There was not a dry eye in the schoolhouse. Clara and David's family grew to include 4 children, and the 2 households remained close, gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays, sharing the work of planting and harvest. The cousins grew up more like siblings, running wild across the ranch land, learning to ride and rope and raid. In 1883, on a warm October evening much like the one when Austin had proposed, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Daniel was 10 now, tall and lanky, helping with the ranch work after school. The twins were 5, identical in appearance but completely different in temperament, currently engaged in an intense game involving their dolls and several of the barn cats. "You remember the day we met?" Theresa asked, leaning against Austin's shoulder. "Every detail," Austin said. "You looked like you were ready to fight the entire town, standing there in the dust with your carpetbag and your determination." "I was terrified," Theresa admitted. "I had come so far and it seemed like it had all been for nothing." "And then I offered you a room," Austin said, smiling. "And changed everything," Theresa finished. "Sometimes I think about how different my life would be if the town had rented to me. I would have taken a room at the boarding house, kept myself separate and professional, focused only on teaching. I never would have really known you." "I think we would have found our way to each other eventually," Austin said. "Some things are just meant to be." "You are a romantic," Theresa teased. "Only about you," Austin said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy, Theresa? Truly happy?" Theresa looked out at the ranch spread before them, at the life they had built together. She thought about her students, now including a second generation as the children of her original pupils started attending. She thought about her children, healthy and thriving and loved. She thought about Austin, her partner in everything, who had never once asked her to be less than she was. "I am happier than I ever dreamed possible," she said honestly. "When I was young, I thought I had to choose between love and purpose, between having a family and having meaningful work. But you showed me I could have both. We built this together, a life that has room for all of it." "We did," Austin agreed, "and we are not done yet. What do you say we see what the next 40 years bring?" Theresa laughed. "That sounds perfect to me." The children called them in for dinner then, Daniel announcing that he had helped prepare the meal and it was probably edible. They went inside together, to the warm light and noise of their family, and Theresa felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was the life she had been meant for, though she could never have imagined it back in Pennsylvania. Every difficulty, every rejection, every moment of doubt had led her here, to this place, to this man, to this beautiful, complicated, perfect life. And as she sat down to dinner surrounded by the people she loved most, Theresa Turner James gave thanks for the closed doors that had led her to the one that opened, for the town that rejected her and the cowboy who offered refuge, for every step of the journey that had brought her home. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. In 1885, Theresa gave birth to their 4th child, another son they named William after her grandmother's husband. She was 34 by then, and the pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her weak for months afterward. Austin hired additional help for the household so she could focus on recovering, and Clara practically moved in for the first few weeks, managing the children and the cooking while Theresa regained her strength. Daniel, at 12, proved himself capable beyond his years, taking on more responsibility with the ranch and helping with his younger siblings. The twins doted on baby William, fighting over who got to hold him. Watching her family rally around her during that difficult time, Theresa felt grateful all over again for the life she had chosen. She returned to teaching that fall, though she reduced her hours somewhat, working with the school board to hire an assistant teacher. Sarah Mitchell was a young woman from Sacramento, and Theresa took pleasure in mentoring her, remembering her own early struggles and wanting to make the path easier for the next generation of educators. In 1887, tragedy struck when a fire destroyed half of downtown Concord, including the original schoolhouse. No one was hurt, but years of work and resources went up in smoke. Theresa stood in the ashes of the building where she had taught for nearly 15 years and felt despair threatened to overwhelm her. But Austin put his arm around her shoulders and said, "We will rebuild, better than before." And they did. Austin led a fundraising effort that brought in money from all over the county. They built a new schoolhouse, larger and better equipped, with separate classrooms for different age groups and a dedicated library space. The town came together in a way Theresa had never seen before, everyone contributing what they could. At the dedication ceremony in 1888, Mayor Kendrick, now elderly and finally willing to acknowledge past mistakes, gave a speech about how Theresa had transformed not just the school but the entire community. "When Miss Turner arrived 15 years ago, we did not know what we were getting," he said. "We were small-minded and unwelcoming. But she persisted, and she showed us what education could do, what dedication and excellence looked like. This new school is not just a building. It is a testament to what is possible when we invest in our children and our future." Theresa cried during the speech, and Austin held her hand throughout, proud and supportive as always. As their children grew, each developed their own interests and passions. Daniel proved to be a natural rancher, working alongside his father from a young age and demonstrating the same careful land management philosophy Austin had learned from his grandfather. At 16, he was already talking about veterinary studies, wanting to better understand and care for the animals. Alice, one of the twins, inherited her mother's love of teaching. She would organize the younger children into impromptu lessons, setting up a mock school in the barn and drilling them on their letters and numbers. Theresa watched her daughter's natural teaching ability emerge and felt a deep satisfaction. Rose, Alice's twin, was different entirely. She loved the outdoors with a fierce passion, spending every possible moment exploring the ranch land, collecting specimens of plants and insects, filling notebooks with detailed drawings and observations. When she announced at 14 that she wanted to study natural sciences at university, Austin did not hesitate to promise his support. William, the youngest, was still finding his way, but he showed talent with music, picking out tunes on the old piano in the parlor, and singing with a clear, sweet voice that made everyone stop to listen. In 1890, Emma, now 27 and with 5 children of her own, came to Theresa with a proposal. She wanted to start a school on her side of the county, where families were too far from Concord to send their children daily. Would Theresa help her develop a curriculum and train her to teach? Theresa threw herself into the project with enthusiasm, thrilled to see her first student becoming an educator herself. They spent months working together, and when Emma's school opened the following year, Theresa was there for the first day, watching with pride as her former student became a teacher. "You have started something that will outlast all of us," Austin observed that evening. "A legacy of education spreading across the whole county." "We started it," Theresa corrected. "None of this would have been possible without you, without the room you offered, the support you have given, the partnership we have built." Austin pulled her close. "We make a good team." "The best," Theresa agreed. In 1892, Daniel left for veterinary school in San Francisco. It was the first time one of their children had left home for an extended period, and Theresa found herself struggling with the separation. But Austin reminded her that they had raised Daniel to be independent and capable, to pursue his dreams, and that letting him go was part of loving him well. The twins were 15 now, both preparing for their own futures. Alice had formally announced her intention to become a teacher, and Theresa began training her just as she had trained Emma. Rose was in correspondence with several universities, seeking one that would admit a woman into their natural sciences program. In 1893, the school celebrated its 20th anniversary. The town threw a celebration, and former students came from all over California to honor Theresa. Thomas, the 14-year-old who had been convinced he was too old for school when she started, was now a successful newspaper editor in Sacramento. He gave a speech about how Theresa had opened the world to him through geography and rating, how she had believed in his potential when no one else did. Story after story echoed the same themes. Theresa had seen possibility where others saw difficulty, had demanded excellence while offering support, had changed lives through education and dedication. Standing there, honored by students spanning 2 decades, Theresa felt the full weight of what she had accomplished. But it was Austin's quiet pride, the way he looked at her like she had hung the stars, that meant the most. That night, back at the ranch, they sat in the study they had added years ago. The room was lined with books now, a library that would have made Theresa's grandmother weep with joy. Their children were scattered. Daniel in San Francisco, the twins upstairs studying, William asleep after an evening of piano practice. 20 years, Theresa said. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I stepped off that stagecoach, desperate and determined. And sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. You were 22, Austin said. So young, though you seemed so capable and sure of yourself. I was terrified, Theresa admitted. I had risked everything on this one opportunity. If it had not worked out, I do not know what I would have done. You would have found another way, Austin said with certainty. That is who you are, someone who finds ways forward, who makes possibilities out of obstacles. Theresa looked at her husband, 51 years old now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was still strong, still capable, still the steady presence he had been from the first day. And she loved him more now than she had 20 years ago, loved him with the depth that came from building a life together, from weathering storms and celebrating joys, from truly knowing another person. I love you, she said simply. Then, now, always. Always, Austin echoed, pulling her close. The next several years brought the expected transitions of a family maturing. Daniel completed his veterinary studies and returned to Concord, setting up a practice that served the whole county. He married a woman named Catherine, a doctor's daughter from San Francisco who adapted to ranch life with surprising ease. They had 2 children in quick succession, giving Austin and Theresa their first grandchildren. Alice followed her passion for teaching, taking a position at Emma's school and proving to be every bit as talented as her mother. She married a fellow teacher, and they talked about starting their own school even farther out in the county, continuing to spread education to remote areas. Rose shocked everyone by being accepted to the University of California at Berkeley, one of the first women in their natural sciences program. She thrived there, sending home letters full of her studies and discoveries. She never married, instead becoming a respected botanist who published extensively about California native plants. William pursued music, studying in San Francisco and eventually becoming a music teacher himself. He married young, to a singer he met through his studies, and they had 4 musical children who filled family gatherings with song. Clara's children grew and married and had children of their own. The extended family gatherings became massive affairs. Sometimes 30 or 40 people crowded into the ranch house, spilling out onto the porch and into the yard. Theresa would look around at these gatherings and marvel at the web of lives that had grown from that first moment of connection between her and Austin. In 1900, Theresa finally retired from daily teaching at the age of 49. She had taught for 27 years, educated hundreds of students, trained a new generation of teachers. The school board honored her with a ceremony, and the town unveiled a plaque on the schoolhouse, naming it the Turner James School, in recognition of both her teaching and Austin's financial support over the years. But retirement did not mean stopping work. Theresa wrote a comprehensive teaching manual based on her methods, which was published and distributed to schools across California. She mentored young teachers, visited schools to observe and advise, and continued to expand the lending library she had started decades ago. Austin, now 60, began gradually stepping back from the day-to-day ranch operations, turning more responsibility over to Daniel. Father and son worked well together, Daniel bringing new ideas and energy while respecting the foundation Austin had built. In 1903, on their 29th wedding anniversary, Austin arranged for them to travel to San Francisco for a week, their first real vacation in years. They stayed in a hotel, attended the opera, visited museums, and walked along the waterfront like young lovers. It was a gift, that week, a reminder that beneath the rancher and teacher, the parents and grandparents, they were still Austin and Theresa, still the two people who had fallen in love over fence repairs and sunset conversations. If you could go back and tell that 22-year-old girl stepping off the stagecoach what her life would become, would you? Austin asked as they walked through Golden Gate Park. Theresa considered the question. No, she said finally, because I would not have believed it. The life we have built is so much bigger and richer and more complicated than anything I could have imagined then. I needed to live it to understand it was possible. No regrets? Austin asked. Not a single one, Theresa said. Well, maybe one. I wish we had taken more trips like this over the years. I wish I had let myself step away from work more often to just be with you. We have time now, Austin said, squeezing her hand. We have all the time in the world. They returned to the ranch renewed, ready for the next phase of their lives. Austin focused on his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope just as he had taught his own children. Theresa wrote and consulted and enjoyed the luxury of reading for pleasure again. In 1905, Concord celebrated 50 years of incorporation, and Theresa and Austin were honored as pillars of the community. The town had grown from a dusty settlement to a proper town with paved streets, electric lights, and a railroad connection. The school that had started with 15 students in a drafty building now had nearly 100 students, multiple teachers, and a reputation that extended across the state. At the celebration, Theresa gave a speech about the power of community, about what could be accomplished when people work together toward common goals. She talked about how far they had all come, the barriers broken, the progress made. And she acknowledged the people who had been there from the beginning, who had taken chances on new ideas and unfamiliar people. 32 years ago, I arrived in this town a stranger, she said. I was refused shelter at every door, judged before I was known, dismissed before I had a chance to prove myself. I could have left, probably should have left. But a man I had never met offered me a room at his ranch and changed the course of my life. She looked at Austin, standing at the back of the crowd. Austin James gave me more than shelter that day. He gave me partnership, support, love, and a life beyond anything I had dreamed possible. And together, we got to help build this community into something we can all be proud of. The applause was thunderous, and when Austin made his way to her side, the crowd cheered even louder. That night, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Theresa reflected on the fullness of her life. She had taught hundreds of students, published works on education, helped establish schools across the county. She had raised 4 remarkable children who were making their own marks on the world. She had loved and been loved by a man who had seen her potential and supported her every step of the way. It was more than enough. It was everything. The years continued their steady march. In 1908, Austin fell ill with pneumonia, and for a terrifying week, Theresa thought she might lose him. She sat by his bedside through long nights, holding his hand, reminding him of all the reasons he had to fight. And he did fight, pulling through with the same determination he brought to everything in his life. The illness left him weaker, though, and from then on, he tired more easily. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for his family never wavered. He spent his days working in the garden, playing with his grandchildren, and sitting on the porch with Theresa, watching the sun set over the land he loved. In 1910, the ranch celebrated 50 years of operation. The James family had become an institution in the county, known for quality cattle, fair dealing, and commitment to the community. Daniel was now fully in charge of operations, with his own son learning the business just as he had learned from Austin. Theresa, at 59, remained active and engaged, though she had finally truly stepped back from formal educational work. She spent her days reading, writing letters to her far-flung former students, and enjoying her role as matriarch of a sprawling family. On a warm October evening in 1913, 40 years almost to the day after they had first met, Theresa and Austin sat on the porch as they had countless times before. Austin was 70 now, still handsome despite the years, his hair completely silver, his hands marked with age spots and old scars. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Theresa asked. "When I was standing in the street trying not to cry, I offered you water," Austin said. "And then I said there was a room at my ranch for you." "Best offer I ever received," Theresa said. "Best decision I ever made," Austin countered. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Daniel calling the hands in for dinner, the peaceful sounds of the ranch at evening. "I have been thinking," Austin said slowly, "about legacy, about what we leave behind." "And what have you concluded?" Theresa asked. "That we have done well," Austin said simply. "The ranch will continue through Daniel and his children. The schools you helped build will educate generations to come. But more than that, we have shown that love and partnership, respect and equality can build something lasting. That is what I am most proud of." Theresa felt tears prickling at her eyes. "We have done well," she agreed. "We have built a good life, Austin. A life filled with purpose and love and family. I could not have asked for more." "Neither could I," Austin said, taking her hand. They continued to sit there as the sun set completely and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. The future stretched ahead, uncertain in its details but secure in its foundation. Whatever came next, they would face it together, just as they had faced everything for the past 40 years. Austin passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1915, at the age of 72. Theresa woke to find him gone, his hand still holding hers, a slight smile on his face as though he had been dreaming something pleasant. The grief was crushing, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe, but underneath, it was gratitude for the life they had shared, for waking up beside him for 41 years, for every conversation and argument and moment of joy. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire county. Austin had touched countless lives through his generosity, his integrity, his quiet leadership. Person after person told Theresa stories she had never heard, small kindnesses Austin had done without seeking recognition, problems he had solved, people he had helped. Theresa stood by his grave and spoke about the man she had loved. "He was the best person I have ever known," she said simply. "Kind without weakness, strong without cruelty, generous without expectation of return. He saw the best in people and helped them see it in themselves. He was my partner, my love, my home, and I will carry him in my heart for whatever time I have left." She lived another 12 years, staying active and engaged with her family and community. She watched her grandchildren grow and marry and have children of their own. She continued to write and consult on education, her reputation growing rather than fading with time. And she kept the ranch running with Daniel's help, determined to preserve what Austin had built. But every evening, she would sit on the porch at sunset, remembering the man who had offered shelter to a desperate teacher and ended up offering her the world. And when she finally joined him in 1927, at the age of 76, her last words were reported to be, "I am coming home." The Turner James School continued for generations, educating children of Concord and beyond. The ranch remained in family hands, passed down through Daniel's line. And the story of the teacher who was refused shelter and the cowboy who opened his door became part of local legend, told and retold as an example of how kindness and courage and love could build something that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. Because sometimes all it takes to change everything is one person who is brave enough to ask for help and another who is brave enough to offer it. And sometimes, from such simple beginnings, extraordinary lives are built.